I do have one question to kind of get started. You made reference to evidence about paid leave reducing poverty. You made reference to a California legislation or a California program. Could you give me a little more details? I mean, how is that structured, and what is the evidence? I mean, how do they measure this?
Wendy, maybe you can jump in on the structure of the California program. I can talk about the evidence.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, structure of the program, and there, is great consistency across the 10 programs that are now laws that are now one. Most of which the programs are up and running. Some of which have only passed this year, and so they're not up and running yet. But in terms of the structure of the program, Indy, you had mentioned this. They are designed as social insurance programs. They are, which means that there, is a small payroll premium that is collected sometimes from only workers, but more often the case now, split between employers and employees, and really as a sustainable way to finance, the kind of leave, this kind of benefit that we're all going to need at some point. So that's in terms of one part of the structure. Other sort of big categories of how these are structured are the number of weeks, the who you can care for as a family member, eligibility requirements in terms of how long you've been in the workforce or how much you've earned in order to take advantage of the benefit. The purposes that I mentioned when I was speaking, the three main kind of categories of purposes: welcome a new child, your own serious personal illness, or family caregiving for a loved one with a serious illness. So those might be the major buckets of how they're designed.
Yeah, so what's the evidence on the reducing poverty?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is that by and large, families see their incomes kind of hit their lowest points just before, during, and after birth. That makes sense for a lot of reasons, but I mean, you see genuine declines and then, a gradual reversal. At the same time, we know the research suggests that income during those earliest years of life might be among the most consequential interventions, boosting income in the early years of life, that is. So what the research suggests from Alexandra Boyle-Stanchik of Mathematica, she looked at the California program from 2004 to 2013, and found that paid leave decreased the risk of poverty among mothers of 1-year-olds by more than 10%. Each year, and increased household income over the same period by an estimated 4.1%. And this is based on participation that was probably around 50%, maybe a little less. So this isn't even based on full participation, which you could imagine us getting closer to with a more robust program, a national program, or robust outreach and education. So these are, just to put in perspective, I mean, these are very sizable effects on reducing the risk of experiencing poverty, 10% with one program. Of course, you can get larger effects mostly with, more dramatic interventions like ensuring housing for folks through public housing, but those are not so widely available, those supports. This in theory was quite widely available.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about politics, kind of on two levels. Wendy, when you had the list of the states, or the timeline of the states, I was just looking at all those states, and it was almost all blue states, or a couple of kind of purplish states on there: Arizona, Colorado. But it seems like most of these programs have come through and been passed in blue states. What have the efforts been to get them passed in red states, and how close have those come, or are they not come close at all? And where are we going to be in 10 years if, blue states have one set of policies and red states have another one?
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into how folks get elected and what the conditions are for getting elected that makes a state house blue or red or purple. What I would say from a people's point of view is that, you know, you don't know whether as an individual who has needs that are very basic and aren't being taken care of, you know, it doesn't matter that you live in a red, blue, or purple state. And I think what is really clear in the polling consistently over, you know, decade or more since we've been looking at this is the incredibly popular support for these types of interventions, these programs, these supports across the aisle, really high, better than 70, 80%. It's exactly what showed up in terms of the outcome in the Colorado ballot, where, you know, jurisdictions are going for Trump and yet voting up on paid leave. So I will also say that in every single one of these campaigns, every single one of the coalitions, these are broad coalitions that are reaching diverse constituencies, diverse perspectives. They include folks, you know, who represent the disability justice community, the aging community, the business community, and they're designing and coming up with very consistent policy designs because they know that that's what works. And it's not like we're not organizing with folks who might identify or vote a certain way. Absolutely do, because they need it and have voiced that they need it. And so there is bipartisan support. We have won a number of these bills with bipartisan support in the states, and it should be that way in Congress too.
Okay. I mean, Indy, I mean, do you think these policies are, is there a possibility that they could be passed in bluer state, or I'm sorry, in redder states?
I mean, look, we've seen substantial expansions in some cases of childcare and pre-K in red states. I think that the challenge is typically among more conservative policymakers, the financing and the funding of the policies. You see proposals routinely for some version of paid leave from more conservative lawmakers throughout the country, and certainly in the Capitol. You'll see more introduced in the next Congress, I guarantee it. But the question is sort of, fine, do you cut from something else to pay for it, or do you sort of, you know, generate new revenues and whatnot? So I'd be surprised if we don't see continued push. I don't have a magic or sort of crystal ball here, and I can't tell you what the agreements would be, but you know, there have been lots of bipartisan efforts and cross-ideological efforts to develop some set of paid leave policies to move forward. You know, I will say that based on the research, some of them are probably not far-reaching enough or inclusive enough, but nevertheless, the interest seems genuine across the ideological spectrum. There's also, I will say, I think, increasing appreciation among businesses that this can be valuable, and maybe they don't want to deal with a patchwork of 30 different state programs and policies that have to interact with their own policies if they have them. And so there's some reason to hope that businesses will increasingly push for some sort of national program.
Okay, and just a reminder to all the viewers out there, if you'd like to ask a question of Wendy or Indy, you can put it in text form in the Q&A buttons on the Zoom screen, or you can raise your hand and we'll be able to call on you. But Indy, could you maybe stick with me a minute longer? What is the cost to the employer and the employee if, you know, when a program does get passed? I mean, you said, I mean, some of these are based on like the unemployment insurance model, or how, what is the financing mechanism, and what's the cost? If I'm a small business owner, for example, what's the cost to me?
Look, if we assume a payroll tax financing mechanism, in theory, what happens is, even if some of the tax is levied on the employer, because it's a uniform tax, we have reason to believe that all that happens is that employers reduce other compensation over time. So they don't, you know, actually pay the tax in a sense. They sort of literally pay it, but not in other sense. So there, in a sense, there's no cost for the actual sort of benefits and the financing. You know, typically, of course, the administration of these programs, even if it's financed, the benefits are financed through payroll tax. Administration is financed through congressional appropriations. And then, of course, employers would have workers who, take advantage of this leave. As we've indicated, I think there's a real case to be made that the proposals being put forward really strike a balance and are quite reasonable in considering the employer's needs and potential challenges, while providing this benefit of likely healthier, more loyal, more attached workers. The reason why so many people have dropped out of the workforce, especially women, in the last sort of 9 months is in part because they couldn't stay attached to their employer. It's not that they said they didn't want to. So for small businesses, you can always think about not technical support, technical assistance, but the more you sort of carve out workers, the more you sort of undermine various aspects of the program, whether it's the social insurance aspect or even the public health benefits, right? And I also do want to point out that there have been proposals for narrow paid leave, say just parental only leave, and there's a real concern there. Not only will it not meet the number one reason why people need leave, which is to care for themselves and their own illness, but there's a real concern that employers might then discriminate against people who they think are likely to need that leave. So maybe adults of certain age, maybe disproportionate women, and they might be less inclined to hire them. If you have more comprehensive, inclusive leave, I think it's less likely that employers will be able to know and pick and choose, which workers are less likely to use that leave.
So I have a question here. This is from Ken Dixon of the Hearst newspapers in Connecticut. Ken is also a former fellow of ours. His question: in Connecticut, minority Republicans have criticized it as, quote, just another tax. In 2022, when benefits will begin to flow, it will be a gubernatorial election year. Are there tactics to protect FML? So, I mean, if it's being criticized as just another tax, how can family medical leave be, I guess, maintained? Wendy, do you have thoughts on that?
I can start. I think, Lindy, you may have just said this, is that there are lots of benefits when you actually ask business owners or folks that might purportedly be represented by some of these views, they support it. I mean, just to stay for a second on the piece you were talking about cost, without a social insurance program, employers who are doing the right thing, which is not everyone, are providing out of pocket, these benefits, right, where they can. And so actually, welcome a social insurance program to be able to share the cost and share it widely as a social insurance program does. So, I think what we've seen from some of the states that have, been implementing for a while or, are in the first, second year of implementation, all the sort of political or politicized pushback that happens has vanished, has sort of evaporated by the time the program is up and running, because people are actually benefiting, both workers and employers, as Indy was just laying out. So, I think another really maybe obvious point is that once folks are benefiting from something this important, this life-changing, that actually contributes to not just their own family's economic security, but the local economy, when folks, Indy, you made this point earlier, the moment when you welcome a child into your home by birth or other means is actually a moment where you could experience deep poverty, because it is a moment where you have increased costs for a number of things, the basics, health, whatever health related expenses. And so, without a paid leave program or wage replacement during that time, you have to necessarily be out of the workforce to care for the child or person who's ill. That's not a choice. You have to do it. You are not spending money if you don't have any wage replacement. You're not going to be able to spend in the local economy. And so, I think there are a lot of hyped up, but maybe misperceptions about what the actual opposition is. I think a certain piece of opposition is very loud, but actually the majority of people and business owners and workers alike support and see the benefit. Once somebody has that benefit, employer, employee, very hard to take it away. last thing I'll say is that implementation of these programs, getting the word out, making sure that people do understand the benefit that's accruing to families, their bottom lines, businesses, their bottom lines, the regional economy, the economy bottom line. The more stories we can tell about that, and that might be to the other question in the chat, the more education there is, the more take-up there is, the more benefit there is, implementation is key, and it's hard to take that kind of benefit away once it's been established.
Okay. Indy, I want a question for you, going back to some kind of congressional or administration and congressional politics. You talked about how the Biden-Harris campaign promised or talked about his desire to sign legislation for universal paid sick days. I have two questions for you. That's what he was saying during the campaign. How did Senator and Vice President Biden treat these issues? And then secondly, where does, for example, Nancy Pelosi stand on these? Are they enthusiastically for it? Will they be cautious when it comes to something like this? So do you have a sense of the big picture politics, Indy?
Yeah, Wendy should also jump in on this for sure. I would say that the Family Act, in its current form, or some variant of it, I guess, has been reintroduced for several Congresses now over the last probably 8 years or so. And it has increasingly gained support. I think there's little doubt in my mind that if the Speaker of the House thought it would pass, that it would be moved forward. We have had lots of conversations, Wendy has been a part of as well, to think about what could be done through reconciliation, which only requires 50+1 votes in the Senate, to advance some form of paid leave. Again, that obviously you can't do reconciliation without a budget resolution that instructs each chamber of Congress to do it, and you wouldn't do that if you're either Mitch McConnell and have a Democratic House, or if you're, or reverse. So that depends on the electoral outcomes. I would just say that, again, the financing is a question, but I think there's a lot of consensus. This has been a long time coming. If anything, there's growing interest in adopting some of the improvements in state policies and programs that have not yet appeared in the last version of the Family Act. There's a belief that, of course, this pandemic actually sort of underscored the need that was already there. Obviously, it amplified it as well. And so if Wendy wants to add something specific about the Vice President's prior treatment of this, I'm just not familiar with it. I just know it was a priority throughout the campaign, and obviously has made it into the transition as well.
Okay, yeah, so Wendy, so how did Senator / Vice President Biden, and then how has Speaker Pelosi treated this issue?
Yep, I mean, each clearly had their own platforms as candidates and spoke robustly about this paid leave as part of a care economy, had actual proposals that were very good, that were taken the lessons of the state programs and applied them in actual proposals. So all of that, feels very positive and very also clear in the messaging that they ran on. And that, conversations as they play out now, as they transition in. I would say, the House, so to the point of the House and Speaker Pelosi, I think there is clear support. I think that we, at least on the advocacy community, have done our work to really broaden the education around these issues, why they're important, all the benefits, how much political support, public support, to the point where there are, enough co-sponsors to demonstrate that the House hopefully is ready to do something about this and take action, and the House has shown up that way throughout the COVID emergency, voting on many packages. Specifically, I think Indy said this earlier, the FFCRA, CARES, and then importantly, the HEROES Act, which did not go anywhere in the Senate, but was very clear in the House, and clear on these provisions. And, I think to Speaker Pelosi's position, this is a very clear, maybe one of the unique policies that absolutely bridges not just across the aisle, but within her chamber. And, important to moderates, important to progressives, really an issue that rings deep, rings true for members. And, I was thinking to mention, I'm sorry, I keep seeing the question in the chat about how can we support the fight to extend these sunsets that are happening at the end of this month if no action is taken. And clearly there's a lot of conversation happening on the Hill this week. And just noting, the GAO report that came out yesterday that's talking about how many employers have filed for the tax credit related to the emergency leave provisions, how many folks have benefited. Again, my remarks earlier were framed as, not enough folks were covered, and that is absolutely true. We need to do something about this, especially with the pressing evidence that shows that paid leave actually helps to deter the virus, slow the spread. Really important, and so important for families' economic security right now. But also just highlighting, in addition to the need, how many have benefited where they have, maybe calling attention to the GAO report, calling attention to how much more is needed in terms of, education. Hopefully these benefits will be extended along with unemployment insurance and student loan debt forgiveness and, housing assistance, all set to expire. So hopefully they will be. And if they are, that the education needs to get out there, that they're available to folks and they should be taking them.
Okay. So we just have time for a couple more questions. Indy, I was hoping you could talk to me a little bit about the research that your center does, particularly on the state level. Do you all have, or do you have recommendations for where reporters can find information that compares what's going on the state level and what their level of effectiveness are?
Yeah, there's been less cross-state comparison in that sense. Recently, there's been some research looking at a few of the states for which we have data, but a lot of the research comes from other countries, from California, but certainly some of the other states in the U.S. So if reporters, want that, I'm not sure it's all in one place. The research, Wendy, you might know. Obviously, folks at Urban and Equitable Growth have recently been spending some time trying to get the data, but it's harder than we'd like. Only a few states really make it all that useful for analyses. So typically what happens, including actually in the case of that Mathematica study of California, is you actually kind of have to look at sort of adjacent data and public surveys and try to discern from that what else could be driving changes that you see, if not this sort of intervention of paid leave. Unfortunately, yeah, it's not quite as rich as we'd like, but yeah, we can help. Anyone can contact me and we can get folks to what is available. Wendy, I don't know if there's really a great go-to comparing states.
Well, is it the Mathematica study, you referenced that before, that's the study from
Yeah.
what, 2004 to 2013?
Yeah, it's actually a more recent study, but those are the years covered.
Right. And who? So I can help reporters find that. Who are the authors of that?
Yeah. So that was Alexandra Boyle-Stanchik. I can send that to you.
Yeah, if you send that to me, then I'll make that available to the reporters. It sounds like a good resource for them.
Yeah.
And finally, talk a little bit about cross country comparisons. What's going on? We've been talking about the U.S. and cross states. What's going on in other countries? What's the range of paid leave policies that are out there, and how's the U.S. compare?
Yeah, they're typically in peer countries, at least, far more robust, substantial durations. To some point at which I think there's some concerns. You have durations of well over a year. In some cases, there may be some concerns about what the optimal duration is for various outcomes. But sometimes these outcomes are also in tension with each other. So what might be best for child health isn't necessarily best for labor market outcome in the parents' generation. And so, but what you see is it's typically a bigger push. Sometimes there's differences, by the way, between countries and sort of who can take the leave. So sometimes you can even use the leave, and maybe your sibling can take some of the leave and use it to take care of you or help you raise a kid. And some countries you can't. There's differences often in single parent versus two parent families. But really, one of the things that other countries have been grappling with, that I think we're still grappling with here, is in some ways, to best advance gender equity, you also really need men to take the leave. And some of that is obviously going to be cultural, but some of that may depend on the policies. And so, yeah, that's an area Canada, I know especially, has recently been tweaking its policies to try to encourage that. And yeah, and in wealthier European nations, the generosity is, is usually quite high compared to some of the earlier US programs. I think we've learned in some of the state programs. And there's also even questions, of course, about the job protection. And I think that's going to be hugely consequential in the US, because as it is, people don't have much meaningful job protection. The vast share of workers are at will employees in one way or another. So that, I think, is sort of more relevant in our context in many ways. And then I would just say that, Wendy mentioned that we're one of the few countries in the world, period, that doesn't have some form of leave or another, right? So, a lot of countries do have, at least some modest form, or even poorer countries, less developed countries, have some form of leave. Parental is often priority, but as we found out, the fact is people need leave for all sorts of other reasons, and the major one is actually own illness.
Yeah, can I quickly just add
Sure,
a couple
sure.
of resources for folks? One, if you haven't seen the documentary 0 Weeks, please find it. Kai Deckens is the documentary filmmaker, really showing that the United States is the outlier, is the clear outlier here. And then two, Jody Hyman, who has long looked at the international data and comparisons on paid time to care, or paid leave, as we call it here. She's now at the World Center at UCLA, and they have a trove of international comparisons, data, a real thought leader on this. So Jody Hyman at UCLA.
I'm sorry, what's the name of the center there too?
I think it's the UCLA World Center, and
Okay,
I can get the information for you too,
I'll
Chris.
look that up. And finally, last question, I want to kind of come back to how we started this, and you both made reference to the impact of paid leave on COVID and on helping reduce the curve. I mean, what is the research on that, and how actually have they measured the impact of paid leave on reducing the spread of COVID, and how solid is that evidence? And also, kind of what's the scope of difference between the places with paid leave and the places without it?
Yeah, I think I may have passed that link along to you, Chris. And so let me just find where I put it in my notes, but it's the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. And I'm sorry that I'm missing who the authors of that research that was done, and yeah, is pretty definitive about how places that had workers that had access to paid sick days. And I think it's underlying paid leave, paid sick days policies that were already in place in the states, in addition to the layering over of the FFCRA provisions. So the fact that folks had access to leave and could take it meant that it curbed or slowed the curve of the virus and the spread. And then there are other studies that we can share with you, before the COVID, before the pandemic, that were, speak a lot to this and consistently about it. And I had one other thought. Sorry, Indy, you want to jump in?
Sorry, no, I was going to talk about that same study on the state paid leave programs. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I remembered it. Sorry, Indy. Good that you were going to say the same thing.
Yeah.
The Urban Institute,
Urban,
so
yeah.
Chantel Boyens and Jack Smulligan, I think it's authored by Chantel, also wrote a short piece about how states like California, New Jersey, that had programs up and running, actually were very responsive in the moment, did exactly as they should have done, served as government should do in responding quickly, and were able to help people quickly. So folks' access to paid leave in the case of Chantel's paper, as the pandemic was hitting or in the early days, being very responsive to getting folks the benefit, making sure that they could access it.